Welcome everyone to the Vocational Science of Freedom Wednesday Night Roundtable. Tonight we're going to be talking and discussing issues in the self-reliant quadrant. And tonight I'm going to be going over some good books that can help people get started to be more self-reliant. Some of these books I have on my shelf. There's a few that I also have to get on my shelf, but I will go over each of the books in detail because of the current situation in the world regarding everything from trade deficits to the hyperinflation that's going on based on the fact that all currencies pretty much on the entire globe are all based in a fiat currency system wherein it's an exponential curve of money creation, and that hockey stick graph turned the corner, if you will, many years ago when they started printing money to bail out the banks. The effects of that are full on now. You don't notice it so much in certain markets because many markets are being manipulated, particularly the precious metals markets are being manipulated. JP Morgan constantly manipulates the silver market. So you can't really see the level and the extent of the hyperinflation that's occurring. But nonetheless, regardless of what fiat currency has ever been, and of course, through history, there's been over something along the lines of 1,400 different types of fiat currencies that have been tried, and of course, they always fail. And of course, they're designed to fail, and mathematically can never be sustainable. And a very good graphic regarding that was placed on, and has been placed multiple times on Zero Hedge, that it shows the buying power of the US dollar. Now, aside from the hyperinflation issue, we also have a situation right now on the West Coast where you have, I think it might even be above 100 container ships that are now anchored off the West Coast, and it's an absolute nightmare as far as unloading those ships and getting the products off of them. And of course, our illegitimate, idiot, communist funded president is making things worse because he put out an order to simply unload all of the ships. Well, now you have around the ports, the West Coast ports, you have in the communities outside of the West Coast ports, you have multiple shipping containers stacked on top of each other. They are completely unorganized, and in order to find one of them to be able to actually get the product out, they have to go take them off of these stacks, which are dangerous to stack them as high as they're stacking them there anyway. The supply chains are starting to break down because of this. And when you get to a situation where you no longer can have replacement parts flowing to, say, manufacturing, then manufacturing shuts down. It turns into a crescendo very, very quickly. This has been witnessed many times in history. It happened during the Great Depression. This is what we're going to talk about tonight and give people the literature that they can keep on their shelves to make sure that they can be self-sufficient in these times. And if you'd like to join the Vocational Science of Freedom Gilded server, you can do so by going to the Vocational Science of Freedom YouTube page and clicking on the little banner in the corner. And then you will be prompted to join the Vocational Science of Freedom Gilded server, where you can then join us up and put in your application, and your application will be looked over and granted in the order that it was received, and then you can have access to all of the other information that we have on the Gilded server. With that, let's...
all of the free information.
Yes, indeed. All the information on the Gilded server is free. If you'd like to have a membership to the Vocational Science of Freedom, then you get the benefits of having access to the monthly classes, and you also gain access to the Vocational Science of Freedom online library, which contains a tremendous amount of books and literature that I and others have amassed over the years. And you also get access to the Vocational Science of Freedom members only section on Gilded. I have several books. First book is When Technology Fails, a manual for self-reliance, sustainability, and surviving the long emergency. Second edition. Author is Matthew Stein. Matthew Stein did a great interview with Red Ice Radio several years ago, speaking upon this book. But if you'd like to go to Red Ice Radio, you can download and listen to the interview that Hendrik Palmgren did with Matthew Stein talking about this book. Matthew Stein was a graduate of MIT. I believe his major was mechanical engineering. In the late 90s, early 2000s, he did a lot of research into understanding economies and the flow of parts and infrastructure based in his engineering background and seeing how fragile the entire system was. And so he literally was called to write this book. And I have a copy of this book, and it is one of the best researched, best put together, best organized books on this subject that I have ever come across. What Matthew did was he amassed a tremendous amount of knowledge in the aspects of homesteading and basically everything that you would think about from a late 1800s viewpoint of technology, meaning not needing electricity, not needing, obviously, internet, or anything that goes along with it. How can one be self-sufficient and self-reliant in a long emergency when infrastructure begins to fail or even has completely failed? The book gives you insight into tools. It gives you insight into crafting. It gives you insight into cottage industry. And of course, cottage industry was, of course, the way that America has always been built. Now, I mean, the modern term, the changing modern term, what used to be called cottage industry would simply be now be called an entrepreneur. So you have a skill set or something interests you, and your hobbies perhaps turn into an income stream, which is, of course, what everyone should do as far as a side income to eventually get themselves to be completely self-reliant and not have to work for someone else or work towards fulfilling someone else's dream instead of yours. The book also gets into some of what the other books I'll bring up here talk about as far as preservation of food, cultivating of food. It gets into animal husbandry. It talks about constructing enclosures for animal husbandry, from chickens to rabbits to pigs to whatever. The amount of the book being only $23. After I read and looked into the book, I would have paid $1,000 for this book. The amount of information that's in this book is phenomenal. It's an absolute must to have in your self-reliance section of your library. It's a book that you can teach your children from because of its great organization. There are many skill sets in this book that are able to be learned and also easily taught from the book. Now, to make a point about skill sets regarding being self-reliant, when the pioneers went west in America and settled the West, the average pioneer had somewhere upwards of 180 different skill sets. These things ranged from everything from carpentry, how to build a sod house, how to do any manner of animal husbandry, how to preserve food, create clothing, knit, spin yarn, so on and so forth. I mean, it's a long list. I'm going to look actually for a list of those skills at some point. I'm thinking somewhere in all of the literature of the world, there has to be a fairly exhaustive list of that. I just remember the number, reading it somewhere in doing research into that period of time in history, that it was 180 some. I think someone said 184 basically. But I would like to actually have a list of the entire skill set. But that, finding that information aside, this book will give you at least that amount of skill sets are mentioned in this book. Now, I'm not in any way, shape, or form, nor do I wish anyone to be any sort of fearmonger. At Vocational Science of Freedom, we're not trying to scare anyone. We're simply giving the facts, historical facts, relating around what has happened, and even what has happened in America. During the Great Depression, we had this same situation happen where supply chains shut down, and once the supply chains shut down, the capacity to create the products that you take for granted being on the shelf disappear. The point of which that happens, when manufacturing can no longer get replacement parts to fix machinery, when there's, say, a shortage of one single, say, element, right? Say, let's take, for example, let's just say copper, right? Just use that as an example. If you had a copper shortage or some problem in the copper industry, it would literally shut down the entire industrial world, because copper is used in so many different things, electronics.
I could jump in quick and say that there's an actual example of this in progress, and that is magnesium. There's a huge magnesium shortage, and it is shutting the aluminum industry down.
Exactly. Good example. Because once you've lost one element like that, like magnesium, it shuts industry after industry after industry down. And think about it, if you shut down the aluminum industry, then you end up shutting down multiple other industries. And what we're getting at is that it's a chain reaction. It's a little snowball at the top of the hill that suddenly turns into something that will destroy everything below it. And it is exponential, because industry after industry after industry gets shut down when you only lose one thing, like, say, magnesium or copper. This is all the more reason why we need to understand and be knowledgeable of late 1800 technology, and also understand and have and make sure that we have available to us the tools and the ability to manufacture on a cottage industry level as many things as we possibly can, as quickly as we possibly can. Say, even if there was no direct problem at the moment, which of course there is, but even if there wasn't, the ability of a sovereign American to be self-reliant, and the duty of a sovereign American to be self-reliant, self-aware, self-governing, and to be able to mount their own self-defense, is what keeps one sovereign. Without those four quadrants, you become a slave. You either become a slave to the system, you become a slave to the Khazarian mob through their filthy fiat currency, you become a wage slave, right? Which is pretty much what happened. I mean, slavery never really was abolished. It just turned into wage slaves, which is still, as far as I'm concerned, a sense of slavery, because the definition of slavery is, if a human being is dependent on anything, they are by definition a slave. It's a really enlightening thing to look up the definition of, say, a free man, and look up the definition of freedom, and then look up and compare that with the definition of a slave and look it up in as many dictionaries as you like. A good homework assignment would be to create a Word doc where you have two columns, just one on either side, and you have the definition of slave on the other, one side, and you have the definition of freedom or free man or a free person on the other, and label each entry from the dictionary that you got it from and put them side by side as a contradistinction between the two. Really understand what that means. Because until America, which used to be this whole, I don't want to call it a system, but this whole attitude of sovereignty, self-reliance, freedom, and that government is and always should be subject to what the sovereignty, we the people, wish it to be, and that government is always the trustee of the people. Until America, the entire world had been in slavery for thousands of years. Truth be told, you'd probably have to go back to various different ancient cultures, possibly ancient Greece, and others but they're few and far between the ones you could pick out where the sociological structure of the society was more leaning towards freedom than it was leaning towards slavery. It wasn't until America where you have an entire society that, one, understood that they were sovereign, and two, understood that with that sovereignty, with that right, comes a duty. Because you cannot have a right without a duty. It is impossible. So, yes, you have your sovereign rights. However, with them come your sovereign duties. If you fail in your sovereign duty, you no longer have that right. That's as basic a principle of understanding of natural law and the common law as you can possibly get. Okay, so this is When Technology Fails. I highly suggest everybody pick it up. So let's move on to the next book. We did do a class on this before regarding forest gardening, and it was under the Self-Reliance Quadrant, which I have posted on the VSOF, How to Live Free and Grow Your Own Food. We talked about this book in this class, but I just want to bring it up again because of how important it is. So, what is a forest garden? A forest garden is a way to plant trees in distances away from each other that not only complement the trees when they're next to each other, and what I mean by complement is that some trees may grow tall and fairly straight. Some trees may grow out. And then you have bushes, and bushes sometimes need a little bit of shade. Sometimes bushes can grow in heavy shade, and some bushes need full light. The idea of a forest garden is to create and nurture a forest environment in a way that benefits food production, first and foremost, human food production. Now, not to say that when you create a forest garden, it doesn't attract all of the other fauna of the forest, because of course it does. You'll have more animals around, you'll have more chipmunks and squirrels and rabbits and raccoons and possums and deer and birds, right? And bees, and of course other beneficial insects. Martin Crawford has been the pioneer, absolute foremost pioneer, in developing the technology and growing a forest garden. He's been doing so in England. Now, of course, England's climate is vastly different than a vast majority of the climates in America. However, the climates in America across the entire, all the states, also differ vastly between one and the other. One of the really good points about understanding how to grow a forest garden, or even understanding how to grow a garden at all, really has to deal with understanding your zone. What zone are you in? You want to find out what zone you're in, and then you want to plant trees that are compatible to your zone. The Midwest is basically in between 4, 5, and 6 on the southern side. Take, for example, say southern Wisconsin, northern Illinois, because southern Wisconsin, and then the Michigan area. I'm familiar with the flora around those areas. Those are pretty much all zone either 4 or 5. And the zones have to deal with the tolerance of the tree or the bush to freezing, to frost, right? So you can't say plant a orange tree or any sort of citrus tree in a zone that freezes solid.
There are some caveats to that, however. For example, the geothermal gardening in Nebraska, where he has citrus trees growing in there.
I was just gonna bring that up. What Lieber is speaking of is that you can grow citrus in higher zones, and there's been men that have pioneered technology where it's basically a sunken in greenhouse. And what they do is they bury the greenhouse and then have it face the south so that they have light coming in, it hits the back wall, warms up the back wall earth, and then you literally plant citrus trees in it's a long greenhouse is basically what it is. And you can dig it out with a backhoe. I'm not exactly sure as to the exact depth. If I had to guess based on looking at the videos, I would say, what would you say, Lieber? Probably 7 feet deep, probably.
No, it's more like it's more like waist to chest deep. I have 3 to 4 feet.
Okay. And
Because the earth embankment is nothing but a big giant energy sink. It's just thermal load.
yeah, from the back end, which would be the north side of it, right? And these things are
Yeah,
they're
exactly.
always facing the south, so that even in the winter, particularly when the sun is low in the northern hemisphere, the sun penetrates deep into and then warms up the
And then
back wall. And of course, this is the same technology.
outside, it's similar to the Earth ship, but they
Yeah,
also have
that's what I
they
was just gonna
bury
say.
a bunch of tubes under the ground, and they circulate air about 8 to 10 feet down, depending on where the frost line is. But it's below the frost line always, and they circulate air through there, and the air is warmed and then pumped through the greenhouse,
Yeah,
keeping it from
it's
freezing.
I think it's about 3 inch. It's 3 inch black plastic tube. I don't know the exact name of it, but then they bury this tube in basically coils, so they kind of have it laid out and it's kind of coiled along itself, a long length, and then they bury it, and yes, and then they pump air through it to make sure that it always stays above freezing inside the citrus growing buried greenhouse, basically. So that's a way that you can kind of extend the growing season, or even literally cheat the growing season.
Well, the huge bonus of the geothermal greenhouses like that is the shorter uh, logistics line, because if you grow your citrus in Nebraska, you can go directly to market in Nebraska, and you don't have to drive the oranges, 1,000 miles up from Florida. So your transportation overhead is minimalized, and your profit margin is much higher.
Indeed. And if all of us had these various different this type of technology, say, set up in small towns all across the northern regions of America, then the northern regions of America would be self-sufficient, even in citrus. So, yes, there's technology like that too. If you could grab the link off of YouTube and put it up
Yep.
into chat, that'd be great. Because I forget what the name of the specific video was.
A
And there's more
couple of
than one
comments as
too.
well.
Yeah, there's more than one. There's I know he the and I forget, his name escapes me. The gentleman that kind of pioneered this. He
No,
pioneered it in
Nebraska.
Nebraska, and then yeah, and then people have been doing it in Wisconsin and various even farther northern regions than Nebraska. That's right.
There's
You can
even
put
one
that.
that's doing it in Alaska now.
Oh, really? Okay.
They just have to tune the system to the climate a little bit. It's similar to earth ships like that.
So back to forest garden. The aspect of a forest garden is to be able to grow a forest in a way where you're planting the trees far enough away from each other that they do not take the light away from the other trees that are growing around them. Meaning, if say you plant an apple tree, and you know that an apple tree at its full will eventually, say, be 15 to 20 feet wide, like a 15 to 20 foot wide circle, right? The diameter. Then space out your trees when you plant them based upon their largest size. And Martin Crawford
Similar
explains
to
this very, very well in his book. He explains it in the aspect of the trees, he explains it from the bushes, and the other aspects is that of the canopy that aren't just trees and bushes are your vines, your creepers, where he has brought in creeper vines, which are also beneficial to humans, say even grapevines, where he'll have them grow up into a certain kinds of trees, and then he'll just prune them back, or he'll keep them in a way where they do not suffocate the tree, right? Or another example of that, and this is called companion planting. And another aspect of that would be to plant along the walkways that he has through his forest garden. On the sides of his walkways, he'll plant herbs, herb plants, right? So they're easily able to be picked, but they get just the proper amount of light that they need in order to flourish in the forest garden. And all you have to do is just go ahead and go onto YouTube or any other video uplink site and type in Martin Crawford Forest Garden. There was a few documentaries actually done on his work that are great that you can watch. The specific names of the documentaries escape me at the moment, but you can definitely just type in Martin Crawford Forest Garden, and you should be able to find various different videos on YouTube which show and have him take you basically on a tour through his forest garden. And it's a really amazing thing to look at. And he's only been doing this on a few acres. But on those few acres of forest garden, he can now produce enough food to feed, I think, somewhere upwards of like 30 families on a couple of acres. And that's an astonishing yield. And on top of it, when you grow a forest garden compared to, say, leveling a piece of ground and just planting, say, one cereal crop on it, which of course is not natural. And of course, nature always fights against that because uh, nature abhors a vacuum and will always try to diversify as quickly as it possibly can.
And here comes Monsanto. Let's fill the fucking vacuum with glyphosate.
Yeah, and you end up with that problem. Because the whole entire idea of GMO seeds is not only killing us, and of course there's been plenty of studies shown. There was various different French scientists that did studies, because Monsanto only did studies to 3 months. Well, or sorry, I think it was, yeah, either 3 or 6. And none of the studies went past that time, because after that amount of time that they had been doing their studies, that's when all of the problems arose in the mice and rats, as far as cancerous tumors and digestive problems and you name it. So we have to get away from all GMOs without question. The very idea of splicing a food that we're going to ingest that has DNA spliced from, say, a spider or a bacteria is insane. Only an insane Luciferian filth would come up with the idea to do that from the simple standpoint of profit. Okay, only evil creates something like that. What we need to do and we need to focus on is diversity of our environments and our forest gardens to repopulate and bring back the natural flora and fauna which this earth has given us, and get the hell away from evil Luciferian fools. So that's the gist of the forest gardening. Let's move on to the next book. And do I'll do the container and then the vertical. So container gardening. This is for more people that need to get started that don't have a plot of land, but there's no reason whatsoever why you cannot grow your own food. You can do so in containers. It's quite easy. I've done it multiple times. And you get the same yield as long as you know what you're doing. And this book, Container Gardening for Beginners, is a very good book, which will help you to start on that path. And the wonderful thing about doing container gardening is that you can control your soil. So you can put exactly what you want to in the soil that's best for that plant. And you can also do that from not so much forest gardening because you're kind of stuck in the zone where you're at because trees are a little bit too big to be putting into containers, but you can do it in any zone with raised garden beds. You can control your soil in a raised garden bed and bring a lot more nutrition into the vegetables and plants that you're growing by being able to control your soil through raised beds. People in cities, they can still grow their own food in containers. And like I said, I've done it before. I've taught many people how to do it, and it's not difficult. One other thing I want to mention about the forest garden is that forest gardens take a long time to develop. There are some trees that actually do prefer to be planted in the fall time, and you can look them up. And so if you wanted to literally start on your forest garden tomorrow, you could look up those trees that prefer to be planted in the fall time. But learn the types of trees that want to be planted and when they want to be planted, whether it be spring or fall. There's very few trees that actually wish to be planted in the middle of summer, and obviously you're not going to be planting anything in the winter if you're in a northern zone. But forest gardens take a decade or more to get going, but you're not necessarily doing this even for yourself. You are planting a forest garden for the next generation. And there were various Native American Indian tribes that specifically made all of their decisions based on the seventh generation, how it would impact the seventh generation from them living here now. And that is true wisdom. So,
A society grows great when old men plant trees, in whose shade they know they shall never sit.
indeed. So, your duty to those that come after you is to give them that shade and that food. Okay, from container gardening, also vertical gardening is another way to produce more food. Now, of course, you're still having a garden, but this is growing up, right? So there's a lot of plants, particularly a lot of vines, that do very well if they just simply grow up. Obviously, tomatoes, we all know about tomatoes, but there's a lot of other vine plants that can also go vertical. There's a lot of pole beans that will do very, very well that you can just plant them straight up. And it's very simple. Really, all you need to do is just put two 2x4s in the ground, put something across it, and then simply get some sort of inexpensive fencing. And it can even be plastic, some plastic mesh, right? All the plant needs is something to grow up and through, and it'll keep growing up and up and up and through it. And just make sure that whatever mesh that you're using is strong enough to support the the final fruit or the final vegetable. Because obviously the last thing you'd want would be to set up something like that and the whole thing fall or collapse or break on you, and then all of your vegetables are on the ground and rotting. So, but I mean, you don't have to go full, say, chain link fence. That's not a necessity. Um,
Although
Chicken
that would
wire
be last quite
works
a while.
fine. It's true. If you wanted to go permanent, yes, you could go full out chain link and never have to worry about it ever again. However, there's various different, say, chicken wire, which is kind of a hexagonal shape or sometimes kind of roundish. Chicken wire works perfectly well. It's plenty. It has plenty of durability. It won't last forever because it will eventually rust out and kind of eventually crack. So you would have to replace it eventually. But yeah, if you wanted to go absolute, never really needed to be replaced, certainly in your lifetime or probably many generations afterwards, yeah, you could go full chain link or something a little bit of a lower gauge. And you can do this all kinds of things. You can there's certain things that you really do absolutely need to do it for. Say, for example, hops. The way they grow hops in Czech Republic and various other places where some of these really good hops were originally cultivated, which is where you have things like the idea of pilsners, right? There's various certain hops that go with certain kinds of beers, and of course, I'm bringing this up because I do enjoy home brewing. I've been doing it for many years, and it's a really fun thing to do. And home brewing can be not just beer, but it can also be creating your own wine and or even distilling your own alcohol. I didn't put up any link tonight about that, but I think we could save distilling, all aspects of distilling, for another self-reliance class. But that's something else that is definitely something that you'd want to implement, because if you think about it, even from a trade standpoint, like say you were someone who never indulged in alcohol, great, no problem. However, the products, meaning the hops, you could still sell to someone else who did, and that's a good side income. There's plenty of people that I know who have a few acres that grow hops, and they do sell them to local uh, brew shops, brew stores. That when the season comes around, there are certain microbrewers that will pay a pretty penny for fresh hops because the oils in them only stay fresh for so long, and that taste, like say particularly with something like an IPA, something that has a lot of hops in it, uh, the hops will only keep their freshness for a certain period of time. Now, how they get around that year round is what they do is they compress them and they turn them into like hop pellets, which is usually what you'll buy when you say buy a home brewing kit. They'll usually send you in the mail a package of hop pellets, not obviously fresh hops, but the flavor does change, and it's something that you can get into and grow all kinds of different various kinds of hops. So the vertical aspect of the hops is not just straight up; it's usually up and over. It's usually a whole like trellis above you, where you've got, and this is again how you see them in the fields in Czech Republic. They go up, across, and then down. It's kind of funny how they harvest them. They'll drive kind of like an elevated truck underneath them, and then people will literally reach up and pick off the hop flowers and then put them into baskets, and that's how they harvest them. So vertical gardening is a very important way of saving space. Right? And of course, your grapes obviously are a vine. And but you can even manipulate. I've even seen people manipulate trees to follow, say, not a vertical, but a horizontal direction by literally kind of slowly bending the tree to follow a horizontal direction, and literally have an apple tree grow horizontally along, say, the top of a fence line. I have seen that done. And yes, it does work. You can do that. Now, of course, that
I seen
requires,
one guy that had a apple tree trained to grow sideways in his basement.
yeah, you can do it. It can be done. There was a gentleman that I saw in, I believe it was California. He only had a half an acre. I don't know, it might have been less than that. It might have been a quarter acre of land in what you would consider to be, suburb conditions. And the amount of food that he produced out of this little quarter acre, half acre, whatever it was, in this little micro garden was enough to supply a couple of restaurants with specialty, his specialty goods, which made him a good income. every year. So anyway, the the capacity for vertical is not something that one should overlook. Okay, so good.
And in a related note, you should also look into keeping bees for the same reason. It will increase your garden's productivity immensely.
Yes, and there are people that I've heard of, and there's some people that I do know that do keep bees, and they obviously have all of their own honey that they ever need, and they also sell the honey. And if you have start to get 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 beehives, you can then go upwards of making $50,000 a year in just selling honey. Now, since the subject was brought up, I don't have a book up for beekeeping, but that can be another class, of which I'd very much like Blue Star to host because he is the beekeeper of which I was speaking of. The way to keep bees healthy in an environment of GMO garbage and other problems is to make sure that you put down mycelium beds, basically mushroom beds, around your beehives, or at least one good mycelium bed where you go and grab as many different kinds of mushrooms. Say, just go walking around in the woods, pick all the mushrooms you can after a nice rain, and bring them back to your mycelium bed. You don't want to pick them when they're very fresh. You want to come back and pick them when they're kind of starting to spore, and then meaning that you can't eat them anymore, but they've started to spore off. And bring them back to your mycelium bed, and then just shake the spores or bury the spores into your mycelium bed, so you have as many different types of mycelium as you possibly can in a mycelium bed. And what a mycelium bed will basically have in it is you can pretty much just do it with wood chips. There is a book, Mycelium Running, is written by Paul Stamets. Paul Stamets is the absolute greatest researcher in mushrooms on this planet today, without question. He is the world leader in the knowledge of mycelium and what it can do. He's even had very high level military contracts to find mycelium that will treat various different ailments and protect against various different biological warfare. Not to say that that's brought up in this book, but Mycelium Running is an extremely interesting and important book about the knowledge of how important mushrooms are and literally how mushrooms can help save the world in all kinds of ways, particularly in health and particularly in the health of bees. His research into mycelium is literally what saved the entire North American bee population, as far as the industrial bee population, meaning the people that would relocate bees and move them from place to place in their hives to pollinate thousands of acres of crops, a year. There was a phenomenon happening called colony collapse, where they couldn't figure out well, they eventually did, but in the beginning, they couldn't figure out why all these colonies of bees were just dying off. And it was a combination of things. One, it was the bees being too exposed to the GMO garbage. Two, it was a parasite, and it's not a microscopic parasite because literally if you see it on the back of a bee, it looks like a little tiny round dot, but that's literally a parasite sucking the life out of the bee. So these parasites also were a problem. And what Paul realized, or literally just had an epiphany of, and again, you can watch a YouTube video. Just look up Paul Stamets on YouTube. He does a really amazing lecture for about an hour, and I think about an hour and 45 minutes, where he goes through systematically all of the amazing epiphanies that he's had in his life about mycelium and what it can do. And anyway, one of the epiphanies was about literally saving the bees. And that because many mycelium have tremendous antifungal and antibacterial properties, what he noticed was that in his mycelium beds that he was doing for research, during certain times of the year, they would just be covered with bees. Like the bees would be all over his mycelium beds, and he couldn't, like he was kind of putting two and two together, realizing that okay, if the bees are coming and licking off the mycelium, then what they must be doing is boosting their own immune system to
It's literally bee penicillin.
yeah, to literally keep away everything that the bee would have an issue with, whether it be a bacterium or a parasite or any sort of virus that might uh, try to or harm the bees. And so he created what he called it mushroom. I think he called it mushroom sugar. Anyway, what it was a kind of a jelly like substance that he made from a couple different mushrooms. And then what he would do is what they did was they put a little container on the top of the beehives and allowed the bees to consume this particular mycelium. uh, I don't want to call it jelly because it wasn't exactly jelly. It was liquid. It flowed probably at the consistency of, say, maybe warm maple syrup. I guess that's the best way to put it. And so, but it was made from certain types of mushrooms that Paul knew to be beneficial, and practically every single hive, like all of the hives, I think, that were given this supplement to them, never had a problem with colony collapse after that point. Never, not one. So it goes to show that the bees knew what they were doing. They were going and getting what they needed to go get. However, when you try to industrialize a bee and move a whole bee colony from place to place to place to place, well, then the bees don't quite figure out where they're at and they don't know where to go get their mycelium. Because when they fly back to the hive, they do their little bee dance, telling the other bees, hey, go that far this direction from where the hive's at. Well, if you move the hive, they get disoriented. So what you kind of have to give them is what they need right on top of the hive. So they just say, "Oh, I'm going to do my little bee dance," and guess what? It's always on top of the hive. It's up there, right? Just go get it. And that's how bees talk to each other. And after he did that, then colony collapse wasn't a problem anymore. So, uh, not to put too fine a point on it, and I would literally dare to say this: the only reason that the entire population of the planet, particularly America, has not been decimated, you can thank Paul Stamets for it. Like literally, because if the
He
colony
literally
collapse would have
staved
continued,
off mass famine.
yes, exactly. If the
He
bees,
saved he saved Western industrial farming, is what he did.
yeah, basically, yeah. So literally single-handedly, um, because no one else had the type of research and the time into mycelium that he did. And these epiphanies, like I said, if you watch the video of him doing his lecture, these epiphanies literally came to him through just serendipitous situations.
It's fucking criminal. He hasn't gotten Nobel Prizes for his work. He should.
Well, he should. Someone should put him up for a Nobel Prize. Honestly, I would. I would definitely say that man deserves it more than any other uh, that I can think of right off the top of my head immediately. So, so anyway, there was a little digression into bees and mycelium, but also very important, and it's another good book to pick up. And we got a few minutes left, so this will be the last book how we go over. So, survival foods. So, how to get ready for any emergency by creating long-lasting prepper's pantry. Basics of canning and preserving. Okay, and also this book is very good and talks about a lot of the dry foods that you can get in bulk and that you can use as far as recipes and various different other things. We're talking beans, rice, all of your cereal grains, wheat, corn, smelt, lentils, split peas, all of it. The amount of dry goods that you should have in your home at any one time for each and every man, woman, and child in your home, I would say would be at least 50 to 100 pounds. I mean, obviously diversified, meaning 50 to 100 pounds total of each of different kind of preserved dry good that will last at least a year, if not longer. Some dry goods will last many years as long as they're kept properly and do not allow to have moisture to get to them. So they're a very good staple. They can be kept for a very long period of time. They And if you get them organically, of course, they can even be resown, meaning you have a bunch of beans, you can, if you get them organically, you can literally replant them if it becomes that type of scenario. And of course, you always want to use organic, and you can get organic dry foods in 20 and 50 pound bags, which I have done before, and which literally saved my life before. Okay, so those are all the books that I wanted to cover, and I'll just take a look at chat real quick before I end for the night. Yep, the Lieber put up the Nebraska YouTube article about what he did. Yeah, plant hardiness, the scales as far as the zones are concerned. So learn your zone. That's the first thing you want to do is always learn your zone and learn what's compatible in there. Oh, and one last note that I'd like to make about seeds and about gardening. Also, you want to find yourself a good organic seed distributor. I, I'm not going to bother to click because I'm not trying to, like I said, I'm not trying to promote Amazon here in any way, shape, or form. But there are a lot of good organic farms and a lot of good organic seed distributors, which you should order your seeds now, literally, for next spring. This is about the time when I usually do it. You really, really do not want to wait until, say, March, because that's when everybody else tends to do it. But right now, right after the fall, is when the seeds are fresh. They've already harvested them and processed them in the way to keep them in the best shape that they can, so that so you can keep them well. Oh, okay. So, all right. Thanks, Christy. I will do that right now. Actually, let's do this. Let's just grab the links for each book, and I will put them into chat. Thank you, Christy, for mentioning to do that. There is one other book, the Vegetable Gardener's Bible. The Vegetable Gardener's Bible is the single best gardening book I have ever found, and it is a tremendous wealth of knowledge.
Oh, you should give them the Survival Garden Secrets one as well, because that has that awesome foliar recipe in it. Survival Garden Secrets. It should be in the Survival Disc folder. I added it to that one, so it should be in there.
Oh, okay. So from that standpoint,
If you
then,
can't find it, I'll get it to you.
yeah. Thank you, Christy. Yeah, bring up the Foxfire series. The Foxfire series of books is, yes, a tremendous wealth of knowledge. You're right, and that was probably an oversight on mine not to mention that. Um, Little background on the Foxfire series. Where the Foxfire series of books came from was a group of college graduate students, and I don't remember if they were majoring in history or maybe sociology. I'm not exactly sure. But anyway, the Foxfire books came into existence because a group of graduate students, and I believe it was for their doctorate thesis, but it might have been for master's. They chose to go around America to find the oldest people that they could that still had this late 18th century, 1800s century knowledge, and record stories of how to do these various different things and put them into a very, very large series of books. I don't remember exactly how many are in the Foxfire series. I think there's 12. Actually, I could probably look it up again. Not trying to promote Amazon here, but I could probably find it. Foxfire books, and it should be the whole list of them. Okay, there's 14. So the full series is $215 apparently on Amazon. And yeah,
You can
and
find it on everybody's favorite bay.
yep, yep. And so each one of them goes through various different skills and different stories. They're kind of hodgepodge. I mean, yes, they do have kind of subjects to each book, but they're intermixed with stories from older people and whatnot and so on and so forth. But they are an amazing wealth of knowledge. And again, there's quite a few of them. So the fact that there's 12 and it's the 40th anniversary. These books have been around for quite a long period of time, and they are a tremendous wealth of knowledge. And of course, obviously, other books have been compiled from the original Foxfire books, like this one, the Foxfire Book of Appalachian Cookery. A wonderful way to look into our history and American self-reliance.
One
That
Second After is a good series as well.
1 second after, I don't know if I know of that one.
That has to do with basically the North America gets EMP'd, and it deals with the after effects of all of that.
Okay, so now we're talking about, well, that's also something that Matthew Stein covers in his book as well. Matthew Stein covers every single type of emergency, whether it be nuclear war, EMP, grid down, infrastructure collapse, tornado, hurricane, fire, flood, basically everything. He covers every single aspect in when technology fails. Yeah, any other book like that? Okay, so this looks like an interesting one. I've never heard of this one. 1 second after. Yeah, as to what would happen. I think I've given everyone a pretty thorough group of books to go and look at and enjoy from and make sure that you have in your library. With that, I'd like to thank everyone for coming tonight and being part of the Vocational Science of Freedom Wednesday Night Roundtable. And I thank you for listening. And if you're listening online, again, you can join the Vocational Science of Freedom by going to the Vocational Science of Freedom YouTube page and clicking on the link. Or you can also simply put into your web browser the gilded.gg/VSOF, and you can join in and put in your application to join the Vocational Science of Freedom Gilded server by simply putting in that link. So again, I thank everyone for coming, and I will see all of you on Saturday night when we do our Vocational Science of Freedom Civics and Sovereignty class.